I think we've got some folks loading on in. Welcome everyone who is joining us today. Hi, Sally. Appreciate you making time to come and talk with us. We are going to take a retrospective on everyone's favorite buzzword, Core Web Vitals. We're 1 year into this adventure. We saw the page experience update go live and begin bopping around your SERPs in July of last year. Desktop rolled out in February of this year. It was properly announced 2 years ago. This is unprecedented. The amount of head start, of notice that Google gave us in this is something that I look forward to continuing in the future as we focus on the technical availability of our content and the web digital worlds we craft and create. Today, I have a fantastic guest with me as Andrea Breanna. She is founder and CEO at RebelMouse. This is a CMS you may have seen featured recently in web.dev for some fantastic Core Web Vital work integrated into the platform. Do remember that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the page. You can submit your questions, and we're going to have a Q&A time at the end. You'll get a short survey at the end of the webinar. It takes less than a minute, I promise. I'm not going to ask your mother's maiden name and all of that. You'll be fine. Do fill that out. Let us know what you think, what you like, what you didn't like, what you want to see more of. We're here to help engage the community, particularly because it is calendar year 3 of Zoom World. And while we're starting to creep on back there, we still have to keep learning. This webinar can be viewed on demand if you have coworkers, colleagues, peers, somebody you want to annoy by making them watch random technical webinars. Send that link over to them. It'll be available. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our fantastic guest today. Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks so much for having me, Jamie. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone for joining. I really love working with and talking with the SEO community. I think is such an incredible group of people. And so it's an honor and a pleasure to speak here. And of course, please use the Q&A, and I encourage interruptions. This is meant to be a conversation. I love learning from all of you, and I'm very, very proud of the relationships we have. So diving into the topic with Core Web Vitals, I'm going to cover today a little bit the why. Why did Google set Core Web Vitals, and why did they give us so much notice when they?
Why did they decree something new on a whim for us to catch up with?
Exactly.
We want answers.
And there is a very real answer for that. And then we're going to talk about the reality of Core Web Vitals. Where are we a year after they 3 years after they gave us the hint and announced it, and a year after it's been live? And talk about the challenges that it presents and solutions to it. And then really important is that as SEO people, that we talk about the ROI. And I think a big question and a big thing I do want to cover in here is that anyone who's put in the time and effort to win Core Web Vitals, you know that if you look at the ROI only as a change in ranking, that might not be the right way to look at it. So we're going to get into all of that, and I'm going to start first with let's go into the dream. This is just very important to understand why did Google do this Core Web Vitals, and why did they give us so much advance notice? And I think it's important to put yourself in the shoes of like someone like Bez, head of SEO and search at Google. Google has been facing a huge threat, and the open web is part of this, which is Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Twitter are walled gardens. And as they gain dominance and gain presence, they have changed a lot, and it actually creates a real threat to the web. One thing that Google realized is that they set a high bar for consumer expectations for what happens when you're browsing content, when you're reading a page, when you're reading a post, etc. And the web by 2015 had fallen drastically behind the technology standards and user expectations.
But they had gotten so many new tools to put into the head, so many marketing pixels to start shipping.
Well, and that there we go into the challenge. It's like the way a website is built, JavaScript is an enormous part of how we bring it together. And that creates a lot of problems. So what happens, and this is still, and we're going to get to the reality of where we are today, this is still a major problem. And Google is losing share. And luckily for Google, Facebook is in a sprawl and in Meta and like our distrust of Facebook. So it gives the open web a real chance to compete. But honestly, those of us who work in SEO, we care about websites. That's the way you win in SEO, is with a website. And if your website is slow to load, has clumsy user experiences, annoying things happen, then people don't want to do that.
They don't bounce right back to the SERP. Google didn't give them a good answer.
Exactly. And so the answer, it's not just about the content, it is about the product that the content sits in. And it needs to be faster, smarter, and friendlier. And so what Google did with Core Web Vitals is they set out to save themselves. Because if their core search business decays, that's a massive problem for them as a company. And so they are, oddly enough, while I think Google is in many ways an evil company, let's face it, they are on the open web side on this by nature, by what they need to provide shareholders. So
they've got to keep up with TikTok expectations, our attention spans.
Exactly. And so why did they give us so much notice is because they knew that this is hard to do. So let's go to the reality. Today, 77% of sites still fail Core Web Vitals. Probably 70% of you are working on sites that have at least 20% of their pages fail, if not 90%. And by the way, the pace of change, when Google told all of us that your ranking position is going to change because of this, only 10% of sites got better than a year ago. So if this was simple to fix, that number would be 80%, not 10%, or at least 50%.
Well, you've got conflicting directives. Google's like, you must GDPR. And then it's like, oh, by the way, you just failed your CLS because of your GDPR.
It's very complex, and it's not even just GDPR. The reality is, like, right now, each website has to compete with the engineering teams of TikTok, Facebook, etc., and really clean expectations of where advertising will fall and how they'll track data and all of these things. So, you don't think about for yourself. You never visit a website, have it be annoying and give you a pop-up and move things around and go slow, and have empathy for them and say, yeah, but it's probably like two people who are trying to do
but
this.
They didn't want me to leave, so they had to make an interstitial to say, please don't leave.
Yeah, all of those things, there's zero empathy from the consumer. They just expect it to be fast and not annoying. So there is this, I will be honest, this is part of why 10 years ago we started RebelMouse, is because WordPress and Drupal, every instance sits alone. And so that's a really hard challenge, and Google knew that they were throwing an enormous challenge to the open web with Core Web Vitals. But remember, before Core Web Vitals, if you went and got your Google PageSpeed score in 2015, 90% of sites got a good score. So it's kind of like in school, grade inflation, where the teacher's giving A's and B's to everyone regardless. And
Google, some of the metrics back then didn't make sense. One was just like, it has a tendency to exist, so we kind of put this in Lighthouse V5. Oh.
Yeah, the metrics were not very good, and they were giving everyone great scores, which, face it, the open web doesn't deserve great scores. It actually is mostly slow and annoying. So this does present a great opportunity to be one of the ones that excel and stand out, but it is a really tough challenge. And the challenge, when you get deep into solving it is like, let's just talk about social embeds. If
It's
you
features versus functionality. It's like tech debt versus what does it provide? And you can't block your whole marketing team from using embeds, but if you
no,
use them, it mucks up all of your score.
they're vital, but there actually is a way to do them right. So for example, if you go and take the YouTube embed code and put it onto your page, that page is about to fail Core Web Vitals, which is a little hilarious since it's a Google product. Like, hey, Google,
Right?
can you make the YouTube embed pass Core Web Vitals, please, if Core Web Vitals is so important? But it's not just YouTube. Twitter and Instagram will do it too. But what we found at RebelMouse, we have what we call the 10X team. And all they do is break down pages, find the problems, and then do deep engineering. So how do you do YouTube? You actually can take the YouTube image, which comes through the API for that video, and you load that image first because it's fast and it's no Core Web Vitals problems. Then, depending on where it is on the page, if it's down in the content, then 2 screens ahead, you begin the transformation because you know the exact height and width, and you can now turn that into an embed so that by the time the user gets there, they didn't even know you loaded an image first. Progressive web apps are the solution. Whether it's an official progressive web app can mean a lot of different things, but let's talk about it just simply. It's about progressively loading the things that matter. So if your YouTube is the lead media, is what we call it, it's the thing with the headline, the first thing and why they came, you can still load image first. So the headline, the image, the body load, then you begin the transformation for that YouTube embed to actually show, and then you load your ads.
So you're using the video facade, the facade for the YouTube. So it's visible, it's there, but then they're not stuck waiting for the whole video to be there. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So you load the super fast, the page loads immediately, and then you get into, and by the way, here comes a new one, interaction, INP. It's like how long until you can interact with it. You can't just leave YouTube translating into an embed, battling with ads at the same time, because the ads are usually pretty intense and the analytics, so you have to progressively load what matters. So YouTube, you can actually load all of these embeds super fast, have it be awesome for SEO, put structured data in that shows all the video information about it, win in video search, and not fail. But it is extra engineering. That's for us.
It takes intention. You're prioritizing loading what matters when it matters. It's really easy to put something on your site, you slap the script in there, but to tell the footer to go ahead and wait because nobody cares about it, or an ad, which when I go in and ad loads before what I came for, I feel like your priorities are clear and I'm gonna go this way.
Exactly. And it's like, forget it. And you know, it turns out we're doing a lot of cases on revenue and how it grows. If the experience is really good, you keep people longer, you get to show them more ads. The problem also we have in technical world of technical SEO is like at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, well, they had it out with their CRO and they said, sorry, but you're not going to be the first thing on the page. You're going to come later. So we get to grow our users because that's the #1 thing. And don't worry, it'll be good for you anyway, because we'll have more users spending more time. It's a little bit harder in media companies where you have not as experienced and knowledgeable CROs that are like, just load the ad faster. At RebelMouse, we have lots of media clients and we have to
block the whole page. Nobody gets to go until my ads are here.
Why did it take so long for the ad to load? It's like, well, first we loaded the other things that keep them here, and then we loaded that as fast as can be. But then even when you go deep into then ads, which is a separate topic, but people have terrible ad stack configurations that call 22 loops through programmatic.
The daisy chains, the way they call to a script, the calls to a CDN, the calls to da-da-da. Yeah.
And those end up competing because what you want to do progressively loading is you want to give a lot of media. Like think when you get on Twitter, well, 30 seconds later, I've seen 22 images. So I can progressively load things down the page, but if I'm also progressively loading ads that have daisy chains going back and forth and going deep and da-da-da, it's really hard. So the other thing is like Twitter and Instagram, that not only do you have to load them progressively and keep them out of the way of loading instantly, but instead load them progressively through lazy load and progressive web app technology. But even if you do that, then, oh my, Twitter's
How long is that tweet? How big was that tweet? Was it a really human tweet?
The height of the tweet will ruin your CLS score and you will fail Core Web Vitals because tweets are not a predictable height. Instagram could have done a more predictable height, but they have comments, mess it all up. And so how many comments, etc. So what we did at RebelMouse is that we have server-side parsing of the tweet. So if an editor puts the tweet in through our entry editor, then we go and hit that tweet with server-side, find out the height, and put that height in. So now I know the height of that tweet. Same for Instagram. So now you can load Twitter and Instagram without CLS penalties. It's a lot of engineering, and that's why Google gave a lot of head start to people. And it's also, by the way, why Core Web Vitals is only a minor part of ranking factor still. I believe every new algo update, they're increasing the rank because this is a priority for them to send people to fast websites. But everyone's got to figure out things like this. And in a world of a WordPress and a Drupal, it's one by one, each site that has to figure these things out. So the other thing is that huge challenge here is forget it, even if you're like, say you're not WordPress or Drupal, but you use Contentful's API and you build your own front end. Well, 99% of Contentful sites are failing Core Web Vitals because they've exaggerated the problem, which is that you've left one or two developers to do the entirety of what, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat invest tens of millions a year on every year. And the worst thing for where we are in the reality of the challenge today is that all of these amazing developer tools that are being used, like Next.js, Bootstrap, every framework comes with this huge overhead that makes development fast. It's awesome. Quickly connected everything. And guess what? You're going to fail about, how long your main thread is, how many nodes you have, and size, because you need to have this tiny size. So what we recommend, and I'm so sorry, I hope the ambulance going by.
This is life in the city, yeah.
That's Brooklyn.
But it's an important trade-off. Like, do you as a business prioritize your site needing minimal developers? You want the autonomy, everything else is just taken care of. They run it for you. And then you're stuck because, you've got these two devs and they can't change these core elements.
Then you find out that jQuery is one of the worst criminals of Core Web. Like the worst is jQuery. Whenever we're looking at a site and seeing and analyzing it, we're like, oh my God, you use jQuery.
And it's really called 5 times. Like
jQuery
variations.
Is the most abusive framework. Next.js, because React is such a powerful framework and Next.js is such a good thing. What we found is that the only way to do this and really put performance first is vanilla.js. You write from scratch only the things you need.
The most simple module reusable components, nothing else.
Exactly, and nothing you don't need, because all these frameworks come with everything you might need. Well, all those things
shipped on every page.
Exactly. Every page load codes that. So Preact.js is actually really tiny, 3 kilobytes. And we recommend that and writing your own code. And that's what we've done. And because we're cloud-based, we can take data from a site, move it in, and have everyone perform well. But however you solve it, you're going to have to solve something, solve big, hard things. And the problem with the open web, of course, is your roadmap was already huge for your developers. So what you wanted them to do before this became the number
one.
You
had functionalities, you had features you wanted to add, and now suddenly Google's telling you, no, you got to prioritize this tech debt.
Exactly. And I think they were right to do it. The solution, the only way to get there is, again, it's about priorities. So if your executives, if you're a technical SEO, the frustration, you recommend to developers to solve it, and you wait how long for them to do it? Ultimately, the right CTO and team with the right executive team on top will prioritize this work because they know
You've got to have the buy-in. You as an SEO cannot have an initiative to autonomously make all the numbers green. Let's just kill that myth now.
Yeah, there's no way. You need to have either the right platform supporting you or the right team supporting you, or both usually. Because even on RebelMouse, we'll have pages that fail because someone says, I don't care. I want the ad to load first. You're like, okay, fine. Skip the loading it progressively. Then we go back and show them the data, and then that tends to convince them. But as a technical SEO, I think your role is to make sure, let's say you have a CTO who really believes in your advice and is on your side. I think as a technical SEO, you have to make sure to prep them and say, listen, you're not going to get this done fast. What we find when we're doing like prospect sales meetings, like there'll be a CTO with a lot of swagger and they're like, don't worry, we're going to fix that. We're already working on it.
Oh, pshaw.
And we talk to them like, then you check back. You're like, okay, you're almost fixed it, right? And then like 3 weeks later, you check and no. 3 months later, you check and no. And a year later and no. So you have to have the CTO not be naive. I think a technical SEO's role right now is saying you think it's easy, but it's not.
Let me read the runes to you.
Yeah.
I know this ancient wisdom that was issued 2 years ago sounds bizarre, but I can show you.
Exactly. And then you have to say that CTO, you have to say, you're going to have to go to the CEO and say, this is going to take real prioritization, and we might have to switch platforms. We might have to rewrite our jQuery. We might have to but it is important for your future.
If you're battling legacy code, like, I understand you're not going to get this actioned. And it may just be you're going, iceberg, hey, iceberg.
Yep, absolutely. And I think as a technical SEO, it is okay to use fear, because it is true that if you don't address these things, the future is going to be very bleak. You're going to continue. We see so many people that we talk to as prospects looking at really deep losses in SEO.
Yeah.
And it's not only Core Web Vitals. There's also, why didn't they get structured data right? Why isn't there an H1 on this page? Or why are there 25 H1s on this page? It's a lot of technical debt that the open web is battling. But I think it's important. Let's talk about, what's the ROI? What do you arm your CTO and CEO with to say that this is absolutely worth investing in? And I think one mistake in the first year of Core Web Vitals is that it's been explained, because it's the SEO teams that follow Google, and it's Google who's saying that you should do this. It's been positioned as something that you should do for Google traffic. And I think that a lot of us, like, I saw a wonderful tweet. I feel so bad not being able to credit this correctly. So if you know who said it, please put it in chat. And I just deeply apologize for not being able to credit correctly. But a very smart tweet I saw said, if you want to be good at SEO, study Google. And if you want to be great at SEO, study users. And I think most of us know that if you ever are finding yourself doing little hacks that take advantage of a loophole that Google has that we all realize is there, that's called black hat SEO.
And it's a short term. Like, if you do manage to get that win, that window's short.
It's a cheap trick, let's face it, and they're going to cover it, and they can come at you with penalties for taking advantage of that. But if you do what they want you to do, which is build better experiences for users, and that's what they're trying to measure, which, as we know, is better content in a better product, that's where you're actually aligned. And it is really wonderful to have these things that maybe structured data doesn't show to a user, but it does show to Google. And you do need that stuff in there. But the rest, and why Core Web Vitals was done, is to create a better experience. So
it's human-centric.
Absolutely.
Back before, when everyone got perfect grades, we were measuring, DOM load, and the workaround was hole punching. People were just asynchronously loading critical pieces of content. They're like, this is fine.
Absolutely. So I'm going to slow the presentation for one moment. If I can find my other tab, Oh no, I closed it. I won't find it. I was going to show how we do Google Data Studios for our clients that make it really obvious for them to look at their new visitors, which I left out of this. But then to look at these groups, because when you're building a digital property, you want to build loyalty into
You
it.
can't just be acquisition. If you're just going, I got them in.
It's
a limited runway. You cannot just burn through everyone.
Yeah, you get a new user who doesn't ever really want to come back, but they occasionally see another link on Facebook or Twitter or an SEO link and they click on you, but they're like, that is not a great way to build a business. The right way, I wrote a piece on Medium with Josh Ellman, who was a partner at Greylock and an investor of TikToks. He's really an amazing person. And we wrote a thing about the side door versus the front door. And companies got obsessed, with the side door. Media companies got really enamored from 2000 to 2018. They almost forgot about their websites because
let's talk about the side door. Let's define the side door versus the front door here.
Side door is someone got to your article page from Facebook, from Twitter, and they came to it kind of like someone else randomly shared it. It became popular. That side door, they got in, and you do want to build your side door traffic. It's absolutely vital in growing a digital property to have an acquisition strategy to get new people. The front door means they came to you on purpose. And there's a few levels of front door when you think about it. The best is they actually typed your URL into the browser.
Imagine they know your name. It's like, this is my friend. Does your friend know your name?
Yeah, like we power a site called Raw Story, which is, I love Raw Story. If you're into politics and you're liberal, but they have an insane amount of people who spend, that's what I was going to show on tab. They have nearly 1 million people who spend like 20 hours a month with them. They're like Netflix.
Yeah,
that's your goal. That's the front door traffic. They've made them the best front door you could ever get is they make you their home screen. When we sold, I was CTO of Huffington Post. When we sold it to AOL, you have no idea how many older people mostly had made AOL their homepage at one point, and they had no idea how to change it, and they didn't even really want to. And the AOL front page traffic was like crazy because they had done all these browser deals that default installed, and people kind of liked it. If you can convince people to make you their home, oh my God. But there are other degrees of loyalty, so you don't have to just have the homepage. Sometimes, and this is a really important one to look at Google traffic. Google shows you very clearly. Look at your own name as a search phrase, right? So you Google Raw Story to get to the front page. That's the same as typing it into the browser. And you can see how much you're generating loyalty by how much your own name grows in Google traffic. You usually own the #1 result and get almost all the traffic from that name. So you can measure that. The other things is it's a front door still if they sign up for a newsletter. They're like, I want you to come to me. I'm not going to come to you, but I'm inviting you to come to me, and then I'll come to your pages from there. So you want to build these. But if you start measuring with your website in these groups, it helps you figure these things out because some sites have, we power a site called Market News, and it's a super high value. They're traders that are paying for market information and news about the markets. So it's a super high value. You have to pay them a lot to get access. And if you look on new visitors, they had somewhere around 20,000 new visitors in the last 30 days, which is tiny compared to some of our big media sites. But they convert those into in the end, they have 800 people that are spending 40 hours a month with them, doing 700 page views a month. That super fan group, and I believe when you're building product, writing content, if you have the opportunity to chase that, that's where you're building the biggest business possible. And these numbers,
trust, there's a genuine relationship.
Yeah, and listen, Right now, it's a huge opportunity because on websites are back in action and organic SEO is back. Remember that third-party cookies are becoming enemy number one. So slow sites, but also privacy invasions are a huge problem. So Google and Apple have declared that we're going to end this era. That means programmatic advertising is going away and advertising on social is going away too. So marketers, if you're an SEO working for a big brand, that website you're working on is more valuable and more important to their future than it has ever been, which is pretty cool as someone who likes websites and building websites, because 5 years ago, there were a lot of people saying, maybe I don't even need a website. I'm just going to post everything on Facebook. It works.
There's a
Now,
lot of small businesses that just go, the overhead of building and maintaining a website is too much. I'm going to use my Facebook page instead.
exactly. But now Facebook has had enough time for them to realize Facebook will screw you. And if you rely on them, like it's just famous stories, you see how BuzzFeed committed to them. And then, oh my God, the way that they change the algo on you. And suddenly it's not your newsletter and your website, your ability to reach them. Facebook has decided to put you in the dark hole of the algo, and it's been brutal for people. So it's called a direct first party relationship. And the only way to have it is with a website. What I'm showing here on these numbers is when we fixed Core Web Vitals on these sites, what happened to these groups. That's what you should think about focusing your company on. Is this is not just a game of SEO. This is a game of growing loyalty because our product is better and people will come more often. So Upworthy is a really wonderful example because people love their content. Their fans tend to be super fans. But you can see if you have great content that clicks with people, oh my God, the difference when you make it super fast for them.
You don't have to pay to make the connections. They're there. They have people in their cohort. Someone in that cohort has a sense of trust in your brand. This seems like we can shift the idea of being Core Vitals was my rankings, and we're now putting it together with Core Vitals is more branded traffic in search queries. It is more direct visits. It's more newsletter signups. It's more relationship. It is a lifetime value instead of turn and burn. You didn't see the content, but you saw the ad that I cared about. It is reciprocal. There is trust.
100%. And a great way to look at it, honestly, like the new visitors for these sites, and when you look at total,
look at these upticks.
New visitors tend to spend on a website about, on the average and on the open web, about 30 seconds. That's nothing. They're there for 1.2 pages in 30 seconds. You look at the pages you can rack up. Like Raw Story does around 90 to 100 million page views a month. And like 80% of that is from people who are loyal or more. And like 30% of it comes from a much smaller group of not their 6 million people they reach, but the 100,000 people who can't apparently have nothing else to do because they're just there all fucking day. But that's what you want to start setting up I believe in Data Studio. It's a wonderful product because analytics, it's hard to build a dashboard on. But in Google Analytics, separate these out and get your company focused that the things you're doing with Core Web Vitals are aimed to build real loyalty and trust and return users who will spend much more time. And whatever your conversion is, the longer you have, whether it's request a demo or have a sales meeting or serve ads to them, the longer they're there, the more you get to give them promotions to those in nice ways that doesn't annoy them or break CLS or cause a pop-up. And then that's where you get this, like, you really can grow your business.
The work that we do as tech SEOs on Core Vitals impacts every medium, every device, every channel. So Absolutely. The idea of only measuring that impact via a ranking is rather myopic.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, right now, unfortunately, the state of SEO. And that's where I think it's this huge opportunity for SEOs to gain more and more power and responsibility and trust within their own organizations. And I think that's where, I hope anything of a takeaway is that you're able to get more trust from the people in your company, whether it's the developer you work with or it's the CEO who reviews work. It's really important to understand that Google has set up a framework to invest in the future. And
Next billion users.
there you go. And this is a huge opportunity because the people who get it right, which we've been talking about return on investment. The only way you do continuous organic growth is if you do not have a leaky bucket. And the leaky bucket is I get really good. I win a search phrase. It's killer. This search phrase is driving us traffic every day. But they stay for 30 seconds and hit 1.2 and never come back, 1.2 pages and never come back. That's not a continuous organic growth. You can fake it a little bit because you won one big search phrase that does that, and then you win another big search phrase that does that. Well, all right, that's good. You're getting better at acquisition. But continuous organic growth means that every time you get them, that 10, 20, 30% of them intentionally come back and stay a long time and sign up for a newsletter or sign up for alerts, make it the homepage, imprints in their mind. So this is the path to continuous organic growth. And we've talked about it a lot, so I'll stay on this slide very quickly, but that true deep loyalty, that's the front door. That's them coming to you on purpose. And Google has given us all a gift in the SEO community because listen, if you're working on structured data, which we spend a lot of time on, you're not building something that is a loyal product for people. You're building a great acquisition source so that Google can parse your site and put it in the right place and tease it with the right snippet. You got to do that. But it is really fun. And I know so many SEOs in the world care more than just like you see how much on Twitter SEO community, the conversation is about long, original, great content. Awesome. But we also as SEOs get to be a part of building the product that makes it awesome. And by the way, when you get into this, it's not just Core Web Vitals and managing third parties, analytics, all these JavaScripts. It's also about, when you get to true deep loyalty, I think you have to understand that we as humans don't like to click. Click is a big leap. We like to scroll. We much, much, much prefer to scroll. So if you want to build loyalty, you're going to have to turn your site into a feed, and a smart one, because that's what people are used to. I don't open Twitter because I'm going to read one article. I open Twitter because I have a stream of content that will attract me. And I can click occasionally, but I can just sit there scrolling. And so to create true deep loyalty, you want this Core Web Vitals progressive web app that keeps them a long time, and you get really smart about how your infinite scroll works. You need to break everything down into little snippets, so it's easier.
Oh, that's a dangerous. You spoke the danger words. So I think a lot of our audience here has had issues with infinite scroll. Yes, it's beautiful for the users, but Google has trouble crawling it. The URLs aren't updating.
Well,
how does RebelMouse address that?
Yeah, you have to invest time into this part of it. And I hate to get into that part because you're so right, Jamie, it can be done. When you scroll, your URL does have to change. And you have to be very clever because Google, you give them structured data and you say, this is the article. And then their bot comes by and says, yeah, but I'll scroll the page and see what I think this is about. And then it scrolls past the article into the next article and starts to say, oh, the next article is also about it. So you have an article about, schools, and then the next article is about COVID, and they think this is an article about schools and COVID. And no, it's not. So this is about progressive web app stuff too. You need to lazy load your infinite scroll content in a very smart way that protects it from being misread by Google bots. And you do need to change your URL on scroll when you get there. But I am very convinced, we've done lots of studies, put users first. Google will follow and then work out the things with Google. There's a lot of little things which we could do an entire webinar just on infinite scroll done right. Because when you get into it, it's an opportunity for your sales teams or conversion events. The thing right after scroll is the moneymaker. That's the, whoa, you can put an enormous amount of traffic into what happens right after the scroll if you have something to work with. But you have to mix popularity, recency, featuring, and you have to have the technical team to pull it off correctly, because fast, half-assed infinite scroll will drive everyone crazy, including Google and your users.
Absolutely.
So it is.
We're coming close in time, and I want to keep time for some of the really good Q&A questions coming in.
Awesome. So why don't we, I think we've covered, you will get higher conversion rates when the site is fast, and we get into next steps. So let's do Q&A, Jamie.
Yeah. I and Andrea are both on Twitter. Please reach out. We love having good conversations. I know it's just like, but wait, infinite scroll and rabbit hole us all. So thanks for coming on that journey. We have a fantastic question from Sally. How are you mitigating the digression of cookies and tracking and building your audiences and presenting these forecasts and reports? That is a phenomenal question that I feel like might be an essay in itself to answer.
I think there's 6 parts to it if I tracked it right. So let's start with the first thing. The open web, if your solution is to go to the enter company and say you have to take off all of these third parties, we can't use them. It's not going to go well for you, because let's face it, like, you're not going to build your own native version of Google Analytics. So let's just start with Google Analytics.
I mean, isn't that GA4 though, is you have to build it?
Well, next webinar, GA4, and that saga.
Let me just bait more rabbit holes in front of you.
Woo, that's a good one. That is a journey. But the way that you deal with third parties is you have to have your developers start to understand how to turn their JavaScript calls into a progressive thing. What we have in our design tools a JavaScript element where you choose as you add JavaScript when it should load. And we have a warning. If it's a load blocking resource, it's like, warning, do not do this. It's a third party that's a load blocking resource. But that's a default of what everyone does.
That's what I want on every site.
It's like, hello, don't. And then you have to do it post LCP as an option. It's like first LCP, then it. And then you progressively can load other things. So first step is parse out your JavaScript and get rid of the shit you don't need. I mean, we see so many crazy things. If you want to do heat map software like Crazy Egg or whatever it is that's going to show you how people click, do it only on 1% of your pages. You don't need every single page view to be exposed to that extra layer. It's crazy. So
universal tags from third parties are genuinely a bad idea. Always know your scope and always measure the impact of them. What is the KPI? Why did you add that? How do you measure it? Does it outweigh the detriment?
Yep, and review it, because yeah, okay, you decided to plug the heat map in. Well, you learned a lot 1 week later. Are you still learning from every page view, or can you pause that? Go review Google Tag Manager, which is the root of all evil of third-party cookies, because it's so easy for anybody to just throw something without any progressive technology. Just throw it in.
The event handlers, unless you manually debounce them, they are popping right in the main thread. This is impacting your first input delay.
Absolutely. So that's a massive part of cookies and JavaScript, is you're going to have to do that. I think another piece of it with third-party cookies and such, if you're if you're in media and you're building websites that need to rely on programmatic advertising, there is some really interesting stuff. That's its next webinar alone that Google's released in preview mode and pre-release mode that allow you to take advantage of some of these things in a better way. And we're exploring that right now. But I do think you have to prepare your company for the end of third-party data and start collecting your own cookies and mapping what do you need to know about your users so that you own that data. And then I think another piece of it was like data studios are really powerful, because what you want in the end when you're guiding a digital property is a dashboard with KPIs everyone can sign off on, everyone's on board. We're all in a mission together to increase. For example, bounce rate is a terrible measure, in my opinion. Don't use bounce rate. You can gain
As somebody who has 55 tabs open at any given time, every time I reopen that window, you get a bounce rate.
Yeah, you can. It's a good concept, but the actual technical measure, bounce rate, can be gamed too easily. You can trigger an event that happens on the page when
If you don't put
loaded.
it non-interacting, it shows
Yeah.
as not a bounce, even if it was one page view.
Yeah, so I believe time per user is a much better measure because, yeah, I could plug in a lot of infinite scroll, change URLs, or get a slideshow, and then I'll rack up page views, right? But how am I keeping people for how long? Time per user is a pretty powerful metric. But whatever the metrics are that you choose, putting them in a Data Studio dashboard gives them, then you open and look at those same measures every time. And that's what we do with loyalty. We do a Google traffic breakdown and that first top level dashboard. Jamie, it was a complicated question. Do you think I got most? Did we get most of it? Or
I think we got most of it. Sally, you can feel free to chime in on that one. Let's see, we have so many really good ones in here. There's one that's really relevant, and it's about someone going, hey, I have this performant platform in staging, but when I go to production, it's terrible. I just want to call up, do you have Tag Manager? Production uses resources, pixels, tools that aren't in your staging environment. So be aware of that.
it's definitely, by the way, we found out in RebelMouse, we actually then take the Google BigQuery data, which you can find Core Web Vitals data, and we have a team look at that every day for changes. Because if you just say, great, we got to great Core Web Vitals and go forward 6 months without looking again, you'll find it fails again. So there is a process of making sure you're really checking, and that includes on your development environment, you passed, and on production, you didn't. Well, there's a big problem to sort out. And like Jamie's saying, maybe it's coming from a Google Tag Manager that's not on, but you've got to work on matching those more exactly. If you have the development team for it, a really wonderful thing to do is when you release anything new, you release it to only 10% of your traffic and measure it there. And then those also have to match up really clearly, but that's a really nice way to do it if you have the technical infrastructure and team to do that.
Well, it's just so important because a lot of times the head becomes a pixel junk drawer. No one knows who owns those. No one knows if they're actively used or how they're measured. Blocking resources are an absolute nightmare. And I do love this is integrated to go ahead and go, hey, you sure about that?
Yeah.
Let's see. We have a fantastic one from an anonymous attendee. I respect your privacy, my friend. My website's using a flexible server service, like it will expand if the traffic raises, or is it bad for server response time because our server response time is terrible? So it sounds like they're using one of those service providers for their servers where it ramps up the more hits that it's getting, but it still sounds pretty slow. Time to first byte isn't a core vital, but it is now an experimental metric.
Yeah, well, server response time is really important. If you have bad server response time, you will fail Core Web Vitals because you'll fail FID, first input, delay, and you'll fail LCP. So you absolutely have to solve it. We at RebelMouse, we do have like Kubernetes, and we have an automatically expanding and contracting to save money. So in the middle of the night, our servers, we have far fewer servers than in the middle of the day. And it automatically expands and collapses. But it sounds like your problem is not how many servers you have. So for example, if you dynamically render a page, how long does it take to render that page? And can you put a caching layer on top of it like Memcache or Varnish? Because then, and that was a huge one we use, and can you use a CDN? So for example, at RebelMouse, we had really cool CDN integrations with Fastly and Cloudflare, and that was dealing with like 80% of the traffic. But you often will skip the CDN because it's the first time you see it in Australia, this one page, or the first person in London see this page. And then what happens? Are your servers dynamically rendering that page at origin?
Every time it's asked for, they're building it and then shipping it off. I mean, it
Yep.
doesn't matter how many servers you scale up. If it's making so many calculations, it still takes a while.
Yep, absolutely. And we're talking about every millisecond matters. So if we did what we call our smart cache on top, which was Varnish plus some other technologies on database level that would cache every page. So if an editor changes it, or a designer or developer changes it, cache clears, but otherwise it holds. And we took response times we see in sales prospects. You can go to your Google Search Console, go to settings, go to site crawl, and check server response time. It's an awesome measure. We see most people are getting like 500 milliseconds to 2 seconds. And what happens when you reduce that? We now have almost everyone on our platform. We've got it under 100 milliseconds.
Oh, and that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really great. And it has awesome, by the way, when you're Google building traffic from Facebook, Facebook clearly measures that number, because traffic grows on Facebook when you lower your server response time, almost 1-to-1.
I feel like we could go down 75.
That's a rabbit hole of its own. But yeah, in short, it's not just expanding how many servers, it's analyzing what a server has to do for that request to load.
Thank you so much for being here with me today, Andrea. There are lots more questions. If someone wants to reach out to you on Twitter, how do they get a hold of you?
So I have it on the deck here. It's Andrea Breanna, NY on Twitter. Or, email me, andrea@rebelmouse.com. And I might be a little late to get to it. Feel free to.
But when you do, you'll bring 5 rabbit holes as the whole party will nerd out.
Absolutely. And so on RebelMouse, we have very normal Twitter handles and Instagram and all of that, or you can find me on LinkedIn. But love these conversations and very happy to try to help however I can.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone who gifted us their time to have this conversation. If you learned something fantastic, feel free to reach out with any questions. We are here to support and develop this community. It's a beautiful place. Thank you. Have a wonderful, what day is it? Wednesday.
Have a beautiful
Bye, y'all.
day, everyone. Bye.